Extra time.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Extra Time podcast. It's me, your host, Patrick van Straaten, and this week I'm joined by Dougie Critchley. Hello Dougie, how are you?
Hi Pat, yeah I'm good thank you, I'm good. It's the 1st of February, I'm feeling renewed by the fact that January 2021 is over. What a dreadful, dreadful month. But February should be much better. It was just so dull, wasn't it, January? At least in the UK. I don't know what it's like for our listeners around the world, but yeah, we've been in lockdown and it's just been an incredibly boring lockdown, more so than the other two. I'm just so fed up of it. But yeah, here we are, new month, new beginnings. I'm pumped. But how are you, Pat?
I'm good, man. I was just thinking, we're closing in on... We didn't do any Sunday Vibes together in the autumn, did we?
No, I don't think so.
So we're closing in on a year since I've seen you in the flesh.
I know. And
it's
what a year.
Nuts.
This flesh has aged quite a lot as well, so...
Well, maybe that will mean that you get the vaccine quicker, dude.
Maybe.
you can hobble into an NHS facility and say, look at me. Do you not think I need it?
Look at my lack of hair. Come on.
That's my attitude. That's the one compensation of being older, that I'm going to get the jab before you all and be impervious to damage.
What,
it's
by your 5 or 4 years being older?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to get the Super Mario invincibility star, and I'm just going to be like just running through plague-ridden towns like in 28 Days Later, while all of you are still cooped up in your houses.
Love it.
Well, on the topic, I guess, of absolute disasters, we decided that we'd do a how to fix this week on Barcelona, which, to be honest, we could just put in the diary for every year from now until the end of time, because Barcelona seem to... I'm not going to say they get dumber with every passing year, but they certainly don't get smarter. And I know that you guys talked a little bit about them on Continental Club the other day and the kind of financial backstory to their current situation, and there was more information over the weekend about this, right? It seems that it was leaked that Lionel Messi's contract over the course of, was it the last 4 years, has cost them something like £500 million, which is not great. And it's not great when you're spending a lot of other money very, very badly. So Dougie, could you give me a little précis of what exactly Barcelona have done over the last few years that has taken them from a club that won the treble in 2015 and looked like they were going into another period of European dominance to a club which now is still one of the better sides in Spain, but which would be certainly outsiders to do anything significant?
Absolutely, yeah. They don't look like they're going to be sort of in the Champions League contention this year, at least. Although I would caveat that by saying, on the pitch in the last 2-3 months, they've actually got a lot better, at least results-wise. I think they've won 8 of their last 10 La Liga games. They're still 10 points behind Atletico Madrid, but Atleti are setting new benchmarks for sort of... I think they've become the second side to hit 50 points at this stage of a season, so they've been absolutely insane. Barcelona, obviously not quite at their best, but, Ronald Koeman's side have slightly improved. But off the pitch, the sort of fallout of the Bartomeu presidency continues. I mean, El Mundo published, not this weekend, the previous weekend, their financial reports for the 2019-20 season that showed the club were in $1.17 billion euros worth of debt. 730 million of which is due in the short term, 226 million of which is due on the 30th of June. And that's before you even go into their financial figures for this season. So people forget that in 2019-20, they had fans in the stadium in the Camp Nou up until, March. They had fans buying merchandise in the club store up until March. This year, it's going to be even worse. And that's despite their wage bill being trimmed 80 million euros last summer. But their wage bill is still 74% of their revenue, which is above their La Liga limit. And they owe a lot of money still on transfers. They owe Liverpool for Coutinho. They owe Ajax a lot of money for De Jong. They even owe Bordeaux for Malcolm. Apparently, in total, they owe £284 million to other clubs for players. And their interim president, Carlos Tusquets, told a Catalan radio station that they weren't able to pay their players their pre-agreed January salaries, which is pretty worrying. And it just basically means that in no uncertain terms, Messi will have to leave this summer if it didn't look like he was going to anyway, because he's so fed up with what's going on the pitch. So he is definitely leaving, and it makes a bit more sense about why they chose to offload Luis Suarez for such a small amount of money, at least in transfer fees, to try and take some money off their wage bill as well. And it probably means that they need a wealthy benefactor to come and take charge of the club and go away from this fan-owned movement that they've been for so long. I mean, they're only one of 4 clubs in Spain that are fan-owned, along with Real Madrid, Osasuna, and one other which escapes me at the moment. Athletic Club, I think it is. So there's going to have to be an absolute change of the ethos and the structure of Barcelona's ownership. And it just can't continue. So this is actually the perfect time to do a how to fix Barcelona, not in terms of their on-pitch performances, because they're actually getting a lot better, but off the pitch, it almost feels like year zero. They really need to rebuild and start again.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, we look at them next year and we think, okay, well, even if they were going into next year with their current situation, it'd be pretty bad. But obviously, they'll be going into it as well without Lionel Messi. You kind of wonder. It was interesting what you're talking about with kind of somebody coming in and pumping some money in, because you wonder if maybe the Catalonian region will have to give them some money or something because of their value as an employer and as a tourism centre for that particular area. Either that, or they're going to have to produce some money from Qatar, which they have done a very good job of doing in the past. But now there's more scrutiny on things like that as well. It's going to be extremely hard to get that money into the club and be able to justify it later, because these sums are astronomical. I mean, like when we're throwing around a figure like £284 million owed on players that are already at the club, it's quite hard to get a sense of how much that is. But when Arsenal played Man United on Saturday, their starting lineup cost about 250 million, and if you swapped out some players for the starters, so if you swapped in, if you swapped in Tierney and Gabriel and Aubameyang, then it would still have cost about 275 million pounds. That's Arsenal's first 11. Now, Arsenal's first 11 isn't great, but that's what they paid for those players. Barcelona owe more than that on guys who are already at the club, some of whom have left the club. As in the case of Malcolm. Like, it's an absolutely staggering amount of money that's just flying out the door every week. And I mean, we talked about this a little bit last summer. I kind of said that I thought they should try and let Messi leave last summer, and I was shouted down on this, and I do understand that, because it felt like if Messi goes, then Barcelona will cease to be relevant at all. And look, if they end up getting into the Champions League places, which they are very much on track to do, then I'm not sure I'd argue it was worth it, but you can sort of understand it a little bit, maybe. You know, you say, like, look, we need to be in the Champions League, we need to maintain our image as a top-level club in order to be able to recruit, in order to attract advertisers, especially with Messi going in 2021, which is what they all assumed last year. But you've got to imagine that if they'd saved Messi's wages this season and had recouped anything on him in the transfer market, you know, if they'd got like 50 mil for him in the transfer market, they would be a lot better off. You know, they'd potentially be in a position to pay off almost all of those short-term fees that they owe. What was it, 220 million? And the thing is, you know, the club hierarchy are really desperate to do that, because the way it works at the club is that the board members, I think, are personally liable for any costs that the club has incurred and has not been able to pay off at the end of the financial year. So all those presidential candidates will be extremely worried about how they're going to raise some money if they go on to win the election. But let's talk a little bit about them on the pitch, because there are some serious issues there. I mean, look, Serginho Dest. Sorry, I've just got to let the cat out of the room. Sushi. Bye. There you go. Obviously, Serginho Dest has started well. Pedri looks like a really good, promising player for the future. Griezmann's had pretty, I don't know, it's okay form. It's been shown up a little bit by how well Luis Suarez is doing at Atletico Madrid. Yeah. But there are definitely some serious needs in this squad. They're not going to be able to sell Griezmann. They're not going to be able to sell Coutinho. So they're going to have to find a way to fit those guys in. They're going to have to find a way probably to replace Messi, because we assume he's going to go unless, Xavi comes in as boss and he's able to convince Messi to stay or something. But even then, I think the money makes it virtually impossible. So, Dukes, what do you think are the key areas for this side to upgrade?
Yeah, I mean, the forward line's not in too bad a state, especially with Trincao having not played many minutes but looking pretty good on occasion. Ansu Fati to come back from injury. Ousmane Dembele has probably injured, going through his best period as a Barcelona player right now. Pedri's obviously stepped up and looks like he links up exceptionally well with Messi, which obviously won't happen next year. But he's had a bigger impact than most people would have expected for a £7 million signing from Las Palmas. So I think the biggest areas of concern are defensive midfield, or another midfielder at least, left back and centre back. Just because left back, Jordi Alba's getting on a bit, and they don't seem to rate Junior Firpo, at least the current management don't at all. And whether that would change if a new manager came in this summer once the new president is elected, we're not really sure. But at the moment, it feels like they need a new left back, new defensive midfielder, and definitely a centre-back as well, because PK's 33, and Lenglet's had a bit of a shaky season, I think, by all accounts, and Titi's come back into the side recently, and their young players like Mingueza and Araujo have done pretty well recently. I'd say with their defence looking so sort of a patchwork of mishmash of players and experience, I actually think they've played quite well, considering, and especially with Sergio Roberto and Dest out on the right-hand side as well. Mingueza's had to fill in as a right-back, so they just basically need, I think, a centre-back, left-back and defensive midfield. But for me, the crucial one is defensive midfielder, because I think Busquets this year, it's been a bit of a decline, slowly and surely, but I think in lots of games that I've watched Busquets this year, it's really notable just how much his physical decline has led to his mental. His still very strong mental attributes in his awareness and his passing and his understanding of where to be just isn't quite where it was, because his body's just simply not quite where it was. I mean, he still started 15 of their 19 league games so far, 15 of their 20, and played the fifth most minutes in their squad, only behind De Jong, Alba, Messi and Griezmann. But I feel like in the Champions League, Koeman often played Pjanic ahead of him, and maybe that was a sign of where he sort of saw Busquets as sort of where he was physically. His tackles and interceptions are at 3.4 this year, down from 4.5, and he's now dribbled past 1.5 times per 90, which is the third most in the squad, but only topped by Pedri and Ansu Fati, which, forwards are more likely to be dribbled past, because they're not as good at pressing and not as good at doing it effectively, but higher up the pitch they're often trying to put more pressure on quicker, whereas Busquets in a deep line position shouldn't really be dribbled past 1.5 times per 90. His attempted tackles have also fallen from 4.6 to 4 to just 3.4 this term, and he's still a fantastic passer, but I feel like now is the time to move on from Busquets. And I think many people a couple of years ago would have said Frankie de Jong. Of course, it's Frankie de Jong. He's, he can play at centre-back. He proved that at Ajax. He's very good in that holding role. But actually, de Jong in the last few weeks has been exceptional as a more box-to-box player. And I feel like you kind of limit him by putting him in that sort of holding six role. In his last 7 games for Barcelona prior to this weekend, 4 goals and 2 assists. And his improvement this year is massive in every area. His tackles and interceptions have gone from 2.2 to 2.7. His shots have almost doubled. His key passes have improved as well. And he's turning into the player that everyone really thought he was going to be following that move from Ajax. And that slightly disappointing first campaign, I think many people would say. At least Barcelona fans were slightly expecting more. So I feel like the player that they really need is a defensive midfielder who could play as one of the other two as well, or in a 4-2-3-1 as well. And I think the guy that they should go for, it's kind of a niche suggestion, but I think the 23-year-old Sassuolo midfielder, Manuel Locatelli, would be the guy to go for. I mean, he came through the Atalanta Academy, then went to AC Milan, graduated to the first team, made about 65 appearances for them before being moved on. He was sent on loan to Sassuolo in 2018-19, played 29 league games, contributed 6 league goals, and then they paid £11 million to make the move permanent. And since then, he's become a mainstay in De Zerbi's side. He's missed 7 games in the season and a half since, and has increasingly been used in a deeper role, actually. Originally, he was used as one of the sort of more box-to-box midfielders, or at least the sort of more energetic pressers. This year, used in a much more deeper role, and he's very solid. I mean, he's close to 5 tackles and interceptions per game. He also takes 1.2 shots, creates over a chance, and completes a dribble as well. And one thing that you probably worry about if you sort of heard about this move without really thinking it through is how is he going to cope with Barcelona's playing style, that sort of ball dominant style, which has slightly changed under Koeman as it is. But actually, I think Locatelli could easily do it. A De Zerbi's side love to dominate possession. They go up the pitch very quickly. They've got a kind of unique style of play where they get into the wings, Berardi and Boga as quickly as possible. And Locatelli's job is to basically break the lines either with a pass or with a dribble as quickly as possible. And he completes 82 passes per game, which is more than any Barcelona player this term, and 4.6 long balls per game. So he can also go long. That's third for midfielders in Italy. And alongside that solid defensive output, 8 progressive passes, which is more than Busquets and fourth in Italy for central midfielders, and 8.5 passes into the final third. And Locatelli looks like he's going to be one of the best Italian midfielders of this generation, at least, alongside Barella and probably Sensi as well. And there has been interest from other clubs. Man City have been sniffing around. They've been eyeing him up as well, probably as a Fernandinho replacement and to rival Rodri when Fernandinho moves on. Juventus are said to be interested as well, so he won't come cheap. Apparently Sassuolo are looking for 40 million euros, which is frankly money that Barcelona don't really have unless they sell some other players. Which they're going to have to this summer, and maybe use some of the Messi money on Locatelli. But I think Locatelli would be well worth looking at.
Yeah, I really like Locatelli. I think I was talking about him last year as an alternative to Thomas Partey when Arsenal were looking for a midfielder in the summer. And it now seems like his profile has gone beyond that. The only issue is that this is exactly the sort of sensible, intelligent signing that Barcelona never make. I think he's well priced, he's young, he's got everything they could possibly want, and as a result they probably won't sign him. They've got a weird idea at Barcelona, and I think this has been such a problem for them over the last 10 years, this idea of like the sort of player Barcelona sign. And I think if Locatelli was Spanish, this would be seen as like a done deal. We would just assume this was going to happen. But because he's playing at Sassuolo, because he's not Spanish, I really do think that it's going to be hard to get Barcelona to cough up the cash for him. Like, that's an issue. And of course, another issue is how much they're able to plan their transfers going forward, knowing that they have this presidential election coming up, which is obviously going to determine their strategy in the future. But I think he's the perfect player. I think he's got absolutely everything you could want. And I've got a couple of alternatives down here, just because I do think that 40 million euros is at the upper end of what Barcelona are going to be able to spend on a player this summer. But I think if you are going to spend money on any of these positions, I would do it on the defensive midfielder and the left back, maybe save it on the centre back and a backup forward, because I think that there are more bargains to be found there, or potentially more squad solutions. Now, obviously, I think Ricky Puig should be playing more for Barca, but he's clearly not going to be playing as a 6. I think Frenkie de Jong can play as a 6 sometimes, but I agree with you. You don't want him to just be there all the time, or at least you want to know that if he's playing notionally in the 6 role, you want him to be able to run forward when he sees the opportunity, knowing that someone's going to cover for him. And I think that Locatelli would do that. A couple of other guys here. Boubakary Soumaré, obviously at Lille, 21 years old, but has already got about 100 appearances for Lille, which is very, very good. He's actually 6th in Europe for passes into the final third per game this season with 9. And 7.5 progressive passes per 90. So he's a pretty special passer. Now, an issue in the last few years, defensive output. Hasn't really been great. His pressures were okay last year, about 17 a game. They're down at 12 this year, but his defensive actions have gone up to about 4, and I think that really 4 is kind of the rock bottom that you want here. You want a player who's making 4 tackles and interceptions or so a game, and in the past, Soumaré has been down in kind of the 2, 2.5, 3 range, which is not good enough. But pretty press resistant as well, 1.3 dribbles a game at an 82% success rate. Given his age, I think this is really, really promising, and he could probably develop. He's not going to be amazing next year necessarily, but he's going to be good. And to me, this is the other thing. Barcelona want to buy guys who are going to help them potentially win a league next season. And when you're in this financial hole, you just cannot do that. Like, Barcelona's attitude needs to be now, if Messi goes, we know we're no longer trying to maximize the last few years of his life as a player. So therefore, what we actually need to do is focus on a team that can win the league in 2023 or 2024 and then can be competitive for the next few years after that. Now with Pedri, I think they've kind of done that. With giving minutes to Ansu Fati, they're kind of doing that. Arguably, even with giving minutes to Mingueza and Araujo, like you could argue they're doing the same again. So I think they need to also have that attitude with their signings and say, okay, maybe this guy isn't going to be world class now, but 2-3 years time, he definitely could be. And for the time being, he can rotate with Busquets. Another guy who I really like, and this seems more likely just because he's Brazilian, is Bruno Guimaraes, who's at Lyon.
Oh yeah, nice.
Right now. Like, I mean, I think that everybody who looks at his numbers is impressed, right? Again, 23 years old, fantastic passer, 7 passes into the final third a game. That's very, very good. He's a bit more attacking than the other guys on this list, though Locatelli last season was creating, I think, about 1.8 chances a game when he was playing, as you said, a little bit further forward. That's where Guimaraes is this season. He's creating 1.8 chances a game, which is great for a guy in his role. Really, really good defensively. 23 pressures a match, which is massive. 5.3 tackles and interceptions a game. So this is somebody who's immediately going to give you solidity and good passing. So those are the things that I would look at him and be like, he can go into our team immediately and free up Frenkie. And 1.2 dribbles a game, 72% success rate. But one of my thoughts here was that maybe he or Soumare might settle a bit more easily at Barcelona. There are some Brazilians in the Barca squad. There's Trincao as well, so there are guys speaking Portuguese. Soumare would have Griezmann, Longley, Dembele, Umtiti, guys who speak French. And I do think these things are factors. Locatelli would come into that side, and he would have to learn a language. And True. That is a little bit of an issue. Whereas if somebody comes in and they can immediately communicate with the guys around them, at least, around their position, then I think that could be a little bit more helpful. So, I don't know, Dukes, which of these... I'm inclined to say that if they can get Locatelli, I think they should get Locatelli. But failing that, I think my second choice would probably be Bruno Guimaraes, but it kind of depends what the price is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that in terms of the ranking. And then Soumare, as the third. I think it's harder to get players out of Lyon than people believe. I mean, last summer they were supposedly broke and they still managed to keep hold of Depay and Aouar. And I think Bruno Guimaraes, Aouar will drive a pretty hard bargain or a hard deal for him as well. So I think it'll be really difficult. But yeah, he's exactly the sort of ability, age range that they should be looking for. Because I'm with you. I think they need to stop thinking that they need to challenge immediately Barcelona, because they've got 2 or 3 years left of Griezmann, who will be a top level forward for them hopefully when Messi leaves. But they really need to start building for that side that's going to hopefully win Champions Leagues in 3 years time, because let's face it, when this old generation are moving out, this new generation is coming through. We've seen it with Real Madrid. They look quite unlikely to challenge this year unless something really surprising happens. So I'm with you.
Yeah, okay. Well, shall we move on to left back then? We'll say that Locatelli's in. That's 40 million euros spent. But we could talk at the end about who we might sell. Let's move on to left back, because I know I said that I think they should spend money here, but I've actually found a kind of cheap option, purely because I think, unless I'm really missing someone, I'm not sure there's somebody here who's like a nailed on perfect Barcelona target who's gettable. You want somebody who's very attacking. Looking at Jordi Alba's numbers, like Jordi Alba is still extremely central to this Barcelona side. Only De Jong's played more minutes than him this season. Junior Firpo, as you were saying, not really trusted. 147 minutes in La Liga. I think they're going to have to move him on. And I know that Spurs have been linked in the past, so I don't think that selling him is going to be an issue. What Alba does for this team is he's an outlet. He's obviously somebody Messi always looks for, but he's also a really important passer for them. 2 passes into the penalty area per game. That's really, really high, especially for a fullback. 7 progressive passes overall. Again, very, very high. Now, obviously, those numbers are going to be juiced a little bit by playing for Barcelona. So if a guy we find here doesn't quite have that same level, then you can assume it'll go up a bit, which is one of the things that makes Locatelli so appealing, right? Locatelli is putting up numbers that are better than Busquets right now on Sassuolo. So you imagine what he'd look like on a team like Barcelona, who have 60% of the ball. It's quite interesting. Alba defensively has never been the best, but he's getting worse. 2.7 tackles and interceptions per game, not tremendous. He's failing with half of the tackles he attempts. So I think you want somebody there who can shore things up a bit. And I think in the absence of a real lights out attacking fullback, I wondered if it was just sensible to get somebody in who's just a good stopgap until you have a perfect target. Now, obviously, Theo Hernandez is out there. I don't think that Barcelona can afford to get him. Somebody like Aaron Martin is out in Germany at Mainz. We've talked about him before. But I was looking at Huesca left back, Javi Galan.
Yeah, I was intrigued by this.
Yeah. I mean, I was just kind of looking through the numbers and I was like, there must be somebody in Spain. People in Spain tend to have buyout clauses. They should be able to get somebody at a reasonable level. And Galan is having a really good season. He wins 75% of his tackle attempts and overall wins possession 4.2 times a game. So
42 would be busy.
Yeah, I know, right? Even for Huesca. And he's like a very competent defender. He's going to be an immediate defensive upgrade. But I don't think he'd be a big downgrade in passing as well. 3.6 progressive passes per game. Not, at Alba levels, but very, very good, especially for a side like Huesca. And 1.4 passes into the penalty area a game, which is about the same as Sergi Roberto. It's the same as Ansu Fati. And more importantly, he's great at getting up the pitch. He currently ranks first among left-backs in Europe for dribbling. He's completing 3.3 dribbles a game at a 79% success rate, which is...
Wow.
Almost unheard of for a fullback. I mean, that's ridiculous. He's also racking up 15 pressures a game, whereas Alba's only on about 9. That would rank him third in the squad. Now, I'd expect it to go down, obviously, because Barca have more possession, which means fewer opportunities to press. But again, it shows that he's somebody who's comfortable defending on the front foot. 26 years old, contract up in 2022. I think that at the very least, Galan would allow you to rest Jordi Alba in a lot of league games, and then you can play Alba in the big matches if you want to. You can play him in the Champions League, and just having someone they can trust to be good enough to play against, the bottom third of the league. I think that's a really underrated thing for big clubs. People say, is this person good enough to come in and replace, I don't know, whoever it is, Trent Alexander-Arnold or whatever. And I think actually more often we should say, is this person good enough to help that side win against weak teams and allow the other player, the first choice, to get a rest? And I think that Galan clearly is. He's clearly a good La Liga fullback. He might even be better than that. We don't really know. I think that this would be a sensible move that would cost basically nothing. And given that Barcelona have basically nothing, maybe it would work out for them. Because otherwise, maybe we'd say, can they get Kieran Tierney off Arsenal? Can they go and get Hakimi off Inter, and play him as a left back? Well, I don't think they can.
Yeah. I think this is similar to... This would be a similar sort of move to what Liverpool tried to do this summer with bringing in Tsimikas to be able to rest Robertson, which, because Tsimikas then got injured, hasn't really been able to happen. And Robertson's been, probably Liverpool's best defender, at least consistently this season, one of their best players this season. But I am worried the fact that he's played pretty much every single game. And Liverpool have some big games coming up. They're in the title fight, but there's no guarantee. They've obviously got Leipzig in the Champions League. If they get through that, they've got more games to come. I think bringing in someone like Galan, I can't say I know a lot about him, and I'm slightly concerned that he's 26 and playing for Huesca, but maybe he just slips through the net. Who knows? And those numbers, as you said, are really impressive. You also very helpfully put down on this script that Juan Bernat is out of contract this summer. He's obviously been out with an ACL injury, which is pretty damaging for a fullback, especially one as dynamic as Bernat, and that could really affect his performance. But if he was brought in on a free to rotate with Jordi Alba, then maybe that wouldn't be the worst move either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is just really one of the most difficult positions to recruit for in world football right now.
Yeah.
I truly don't know what it is. Anybody's a risk. Maybe, Emerson has been on the outs at Chelsea for a long time, but he's also getting up there in age. He's got consistent injury issues. I don't think that somebody who's got that defensive ability and has the capability to attack in a Barcelona style is going to be financially doable. So, yeah, I was just looking around and I thought, what I don't want to do, the last thing I think Barcelona should be doing is committing a big wage packet to somebody in their late 20s. And so I think the appeal of getting somebody in who's going to cost you, 20, 30k a week that's a really underrated boon for Barcelona. If you can swap out Junior Firpo for somebody else who you can actually play, and probably make a profit, because I think they could probably still get 20 mil for Firpo if they sold him to the Prem or something.
Yeah.
I think that would be a sensible move. I mean, the other thing they could do is try and is think about maybe someone like Zinchenko from Manchester City. Like, if he's available, he's obviously comfortable in a possession system. He's got that attacking capability.
Been awesome recently.
Yeah, and I mean, he's just a sensible signing. But I again think he's going to cost 25 mil, even as a cut price player. And I think that Galan is probably going to cost like 6. So that's what leads me to this. But I can understand if people are a bit suspicious about it. I just think that Barcelona have got to really temper their expectations for the next couple of transfer windows. Should we move on to centre back?
Yeah, let's. Because I think the centre backs one's a bit weird because the player they've been linked with consistently over the last sort of year or so is Eric Garcia, the Man City centre back. Now, he's out of contract this summer, which is obviously appeals. He obviously came through the Barcelona academy, but I haven't seen enough of Eric Garcia, I suppose I just haven't seen enough to really determine whether he's going to be the next great centre back. I think it's a bit of a baffling move, to be honest. I've watched him play at Man City. He looks solid without being spectacular. He's not particularly tall. He's not particularly imposing as a centre back. I think he looks solid enough. Barca supposedly wanted him last summer but couldn't afford him, while there's also sort of disagreement about whether he'd be the right player amongst their various sort of presidential candidates. Yeah. And he actually hasn't played that many games for City. He's only made 32 appearances for them in all competitions and has appeared in the league just 3 times this season. Obviously, Ruben Dias has adapted fantastically well to the Premier League. John Stones has had a bit of a renaissance. Laporte's been out with injury, but now he's back as well. So it looks like those there sort of 3 set centre-backs. And Eric Garcia is going to find game time really difficult to come by. I mean, his numbers as well, which we've got down here, just really not that impressive. Nothing really stands out. 0.3 tackles a game, which is the lowest among City centre-backs. Dribble past 0.4 times a game. 2.9 long balls, which is the lowest. 24% aerial win rate. Now, that's really troubling. You'd want a top centre-back to at least be at 60, 65%. So 24% is not good. So none of this doesn't necessarily mean, because he's so inexperienced, that he's not going to one day be very useful. But it's not like, Gerard Piqué arriving back from Man United to Barcelona, which was, it seemed like he was already performing well for United in his limited minutes. He was struggling to displace Vidic and Ferdinand at the time, but he had those amazing games against, I think it was Roma in the Champions League. I seem to remember he played phenomenally well as well. Seemed like he had a massive, massive future, and he arrived back, slotted in alongside Puyol and rebuilt that Barcelona defence, and they went on to all the success they did. I don't think Eric Garcia is the sort of player that you put in alongside Longley and I'm like, oh god, they've got one of the best defences in the league now. But for a club, shorn of finances, obviously he's obviously got ties to Barcelona, he's out of contract, maybe it's not the worst move, but I'm definitely not overwhelmed by it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, yeah, I can see the benefits to it because he is young and because he has been playing in a possession team and blah, 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 blah. But, I mean, to me, this feels like maybe we have to do this because anybody else is going to cost huge wages. The other people we've seen linked with Barcelona as defenders are guys who are out of contract this summer. Yeah. So, David Luiz, Mustafi, Alaba, Boateng. I mean, even Sergio Ramos, you could consider. But the only one of those that I would really want to sign would be Alaba. And
imagine the scenes if Ramos went to Barcelona.
Yeah, but I mean, even if he could, imagine the wages. It would just be absolutely ridiculous. I just don't think they can do it. Like,
absolutely not. He's not a gamer.
Like when we were doing the script, I started thinking like, I can write a section here on like Sven Botman. I can start writing a section here on Dayot Upamecano again. But I was just like, it's not going to happen. They don't have the money. And nor should they spend here, because I actually think when you look at Garcia's numbers, I kind of think Araujo looks better right now. Like 2.7 tackles and interceptions per 90, not particularly bad. Wins 70% of his aerial wins. 2.4 long balls, not amazing, but doesn't necessarily matter if you've got improved passing at the base of midfield. Hasn't been dribbled past in league play once this season. Like, I think that's fine. He's 21 years old. Just leave him in there and give him the minutes. Like, if you bring in Garcia, if you have Garcia, Piqué, Araujo, Longley, you probably shift out Umtiti. You've got Mingueza as well. And you've even got, in a pinch, Frankie de Jong, who can step back there. And then you could play a midfield 3 of, like, Locatelli, Puig, and Pedri or something. I actually think that's fine. It doesn't set the world on fire. But if you don't have the money, you just can't do it. And like we've said, DM has got to be the priority. That is where all the balance in this side is going to come. I mean, the one thing is, Barcelona's defense is the issue, right, this season. When you were talking about their numbers at the beginning, like attacking XG, attacking output, very good. Defensively, like 8th in the league. That's clearly where they need to make gains. Though, of course, you'd expect the attack to come back down to earth a little bit, with Messi leaving. But they can clearly push that up and make themselves, one of the tougher sides to beat in the league, at least. And I think that defensive midfield is going to have to be where they do that. So my sense here is, fine, let's go with Garcia, bring him in on a free or a compensation fee or whatever it might be. And then we've kind of got Galan, we've got Garcia, and we've got Locatelli for what? Like 46 million euros combined?
It's pretty good.
Probably we've actually taken money off the wage bill if we can shift out Firpo and Umtiti and maybe Neto as the backup keeper. Like, I think that there's some money to be found there. Oh, and of course, Lionel Messi's 120 million euros a year or whatever it is. So I'm quite happy with that, unless there's somebody else that you want to chuck in. I mean, is there an argument, do you think, for trying to go and get Upamecano? Is there any way that Barcelona would be able to do that?
I just think it's so not on their radar this summer financially. Like, I just don't see how they can do that whilst also sorting out defensive midfield, which, as we've sort of earmarked, is the area of massive concern. I mean, their midfield balance at times this year hasn't looked great, and I haven't really understood the signing of Pjanic, to be totally honest.
No.
Like, he's not being used enough to make it worthwhile. He had a pretty good game against Athletic at the weekend, but I just haven't really seen the benefit of that so far, and he's not a spring chicken anymore either. But I mean, that I like the credit you give to Araujo as well. I was watching the highlights of that game against Athletic, and he had an awesome moment where he sort of dribbled through their attack and fired off a shot, and the commentator, in that typical Spanish way, was getting so overexcited and just being like, physically he is just superb, he's so tall, he's so fast. And I was like, yeah, he does look really useful as well, and he hasn't really put a foot wrong so far in the games that I've watched him. So Araujo seems to have a massive future, and as I said earlier, Mingueza at right back's done a pretty good job as well, covering for Serginho Dest, who's actually adapted really well to Barcelona so far. So lots of their signings from last summer haven't done too badly. They just kind of need to continue in that mould. And it seemed like their board last summer were kind of getting the idea that they needed to aim younger, they needed to go for more players with higher potential, your Pedris, Trincaos, Desks, etc. So if they continue this summer, then who knows, maybe there's an outside bet that they could challenge next year and really build for one in 2 or 3 years' time. Yeah,
like if one of those guys explodes, you can definitely get lucky there. Like, if you get somebody in there like a Martinelli or a Pedro Neto or someone, and just suddenly they're like good enough to play, then that's obviously an enormous boon, and at the very least you're going to turn a profit on them. So I could definitely see that. I don't know. I guess my issue is that I don't think any of these guys are going to be stars. Like, that's a bit of a problem. What you want is to buy these youngsters with star potential. I mean, Pedri might well be a star, but like it's just really, really hard to say. And we also just don't know what's going to happen when Messi goes, which I guess we should come on to next, in the forward line, because great players have a tendency to make the players around them. I was about to say, yeah. And we just don't know what sort of a hole there'll be in people's progressive passing, right, requires 2 things to happen. It requires a player to be able to spot the pass and be able to execute it. But it also requires somebody moving ahead of them and capable of finding that space to be passed to. Like, receiving the ball in a dangerous position is a real skill. You saw that, not to bring everything back to Arsenal, but you saw that earlier in the season. Like, Partey and Xhaka are actually very good progressive passers. It's like the one thing Xhaka can do, and Partey's good at it as well. But when Arsenal had nobody between the lines earlier in the season, it didn't matter that they could do it because there was no one to pass to.
Yeah.
And similarly at Barcelona, you wonder what's going to happen when Messi is taken out. Like, can they just hand the reins of the attack to Coutinho and say, you know what, we need you to be Liverpool Coutinho now. And you hope that Fati takes a step forward in his development, and you hope that Griezmann can hold on for another year, and you hope that Dembele can find fitness, or Trincao can step forward. But you're hoping for lots of things to happen at once. It's a really big hole in the attack, Dukes.
It's massive, and I feel like with Coutinho's injury issues this season, it's actually kind of been Pedri who's kind of look like the player that's most similar to Messi in how he's sort of binding the play, how he finds manipulates space as well, how comfortable he is in tight areas. Like Pedri has kind of been the player that's sort of taken me most by surprise this year. But you're so right, we just don't know how this Barcelona attack functions without Messi. I mean, we've seen it in a few games this year. Obviously, when Messi got suspended for getting sent off in the Spanish Super Cup final, they had to play 2 games without him, and one of them was in the Copa del Rey and the other was against Elche, and they won, both of which, but they weren't sort of dominant displays by any stretch. They've had a couple of games ago. I think they played Real Betis earlier this season and rested Messi, and they won quite comfortably as well. So it just really depends how they're going to use Griezmann and what his relationship is going to be like with your Coutinhos, with your Pedris, etc. Because it's probably going to have to be one of Coutinho and Pedri that plays if you want Ansu Fati to start and Ousmane Dembele. So it's complicated, really. But they might need another sort of utility forward, as it were. I think Martin Braithwaite, no one is convinced that Martin Braithwaite was ever the answer. I think he's done better than people expected, to be honest, and he doesn't look totally out of place, but his output's just not Barcelona levels. So they probably do need another sort of utility forward. And, you know, people are going to laugh in the comments because on every How to Fix, we always mention him, and, you know, everyone takes the piss out of him, but like takes the piss out of us for mentioning him. But Memphis Depay is available for a very cheap fee, supposedly this summer. He wants to join Barcelona. It just makes sense for me. I mean, Pat, I know you're a big fan of Depay.
Yeah, I mean, I am, and we can't not mention him here because he's been linked with Barcelona for the last year. I mean, he's somebody who Koeman obviously likes, obviously gave him that freer role as a centre-forward for the Netherlands, which I think would make a lot of sense at Barcelona, because one of the things that's going to happen with Messi going is that there's a bit of a hole on the right. You know, you've got Coutinho who could play on the left or as a 10. You've got Dembele who can play on the right, but doesn't really want to anymore, I don't think. You've got Fati who plays off the left. Griezmann has been playing as a forward. But I think if you have Depay in there, Depay can start as your forward and Griezmann can start on the right, and then they can interchange. And I think that might actually work better for everybody involved. I mean, Depay's numbers this season, despite the fact that he was coming off a knee injury last year, are really frightening. I mean, 3.3 shots, 3 key passes, 2.4 dribbles a game, 0.76 non-penalty expected goals and assists per 90. That is elite. He's already got 18 goal involvements in the league. That's pretty much up there with expectation. In fact, it's slightly behind. He's not too old. He's 27 in a couple of weeks' time. And I don't think, while he'd command bigger wages than some people, his wages are not going to be crazy for Barca. I think maybe 100k a week, maybe. Mm-hmm. There are concerns. There are concerns about him, right? Like, firstly, I don't think defensively he's quite what you'd want him to be. He's not a particularly great presser. You know, he's not going to work super hard, and you can't carry that many people. And I think the Barcelona have quite a lot of people they're carrying in the attack defensively. That's a bit of a worry, though. Maybe that's eased by having a better defensive fullback, by having Locatelli in there. You wonder about his mobility following that injury. Like, his dribble numbers, as I said, still good, but they are down on last season. So is his dribble success rate. So we may be seeing a little bit of a decline there. So I think there are issues there, but broadly, I think he just sort of, he'd be free and he'd be the best approximation of Messi that Barcelona can get. Like, nobody is going to be Messi. I suppose they could maybe try a short-term deal, like for Papu Gomez or something. If you gave Papu Gomez like a 1-year contract.
He's already gone to Sevilla, though.
Has he really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he went to Sevilla last week.
Okay, well, that's all right. I mean, Di Maria as well. I think Di Maria might be available, but Di Maria is going to cost a lot more in wages, and I think I'd rather have Depay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd rather have Depay too. I think particularly this year when we've seen him, or in the last 2 years when we've seen him play more centrally as well, his output's just really gone through the roof. And this year, playing with Carl Toko Ekambi, he's generally played off the left, and then Tino Kadewere, who looks really impressive on the right-hand side as well. It's a pretty dynamic forward line at Lyon, and they've done a lot better than most people expected in Ligue 1 this year, given the sort of turmoil that happened with the club during the financial problems that struck the club, and then so much speculation around their key players as well, and obviously losing Toussaint and Ndombele over the last 12 months as well. So I think Depay is not the worst signing, but as we've said throughout the show, I'd like definitely prioritise defensive midfield over Depay, because I think they can cope without Depay, whereas I don't think they can cope for much longer without a lights out defensive midfielder.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. Like, it's just my worry here is that you were saying at the beginning, Barcelona are taking 16 shots a game. Messi is either taking or creating 7.5 of those. That's troubling, like that's such a hole in an attack, like that you're losing so much there. And Depay isn't going to replace it exactly, but he's creating 5.5 shots a game. Like he's in the top 10 in Europe for this right now. And I just think you just need shots. Like maybe Griezmann gets more shots without Messi there. Like maybe Coutinho does, because more is going through Coutinho than Messi. But I don't know. It really, really concerns me. It's so hard to make up for this shortfall. And it reminds me a little bit of like when Real Madrid were losing Ronaldo, and people were saying, like, Chris doesn't like it when I point this out, but Chris did say this on sometimes. He was just like, I think that everybody else is going to like step up around the squad. And to be honest, that was like a widely held view at the time, that like maybe other people would produce a little bit more, and Benzema did. But you still can't produce enough to make up for that superstar player.
Yeah.
And Lionel Messi is the best player in the world. I just don't think that you can cover this loss without at least trying to bring somebody in who can do it. Now, I think there is more to come from Coutinho, but somebody like Fati or Trincao, these guys could just as easily be worse next year than this year, because they're at an age where you often take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Progression isn't linear. So I don't know. I just sort of think, is it worth getting in somebody like Depay? 5.5 shots a game. Di Maria, 5.9 shots he takes or creates per game. Like these players might help them out, because otherwise they could easily find themselves next season with a better defense, but like maybe 4th best in Spain, and a worse attack, as in maybe the 4th or 5th best in Spain, and then suddenly you're like in the Europa League race, really.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous, because then people start to look to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't really go into the proper detail at the start of the show. Like you've mentioned it briefly there, but their attack has been really good. First for shots on target. They take 2.5 more. They get 2.5 more shots on target than Real Madrid, and their expected goals per game is 2.3, which is way up on 1.9 from last year. And the defence has kind of been middling. Actually, in terms of their expected goal difference, so their difference between their expected goals and expected goals against, it's 1.2, which is much better than Atletico Madrid's 0.8. It doesn't necessarily mean they're a better side. They're obviously playing a completely different style to Atletico Madrid. But Pat, you're right to worry that if that sort of attack takes a big drop, which it will take a drop when Messi leaves, then their sort of difference maker, which makes them competitive this year, is going to suffer unless they get a better standard of defensive midfielder in, as we've said, and maybe sort of upgrade some of their defensive talent as well, or at least get more consistent fitness and form out of PK, Longley, and Titi. Yeah.
I mean, that is going to be an issue as well. But of course, this is all kind of up in the air too, because we have no idea if Koeman will still be in. We have no idea what their system will be. And whilst I think Koeman is like he's a conservative, sensible manager. He's not going to completely destroy your side. He's also not really going to add anything to your side. He's not going to be a guy like Pochettino, who gets more out of the players at his disposal than you'd expect. So I just really struggle to see what the edges are going to be at Barcelona. And I mean, I'm not concerned for them because I don't care about them, but I'm concerned for them as in they might have a really bad next few years. And if you're not careful, if you don't take those bad years as an invitation to improve your process, then you can suddenly find yourself in the wilderness for a long, long time, as we've seen with, say, Manchester United. So, I don't know. Are these our signings then, Dukes? Are we settling on Locatelli, defensive midfield, Javi Galan, left back, centre back, Eric Garcia on a free, Memphis Depay on a free up front? Is that what we're doing?
I think it's the best we could do, given the circumstances, given their financial situation. I mean, some players might say some listeners, or watchers on YouTube might say that's a pretty underwhelming list, but it has to be done. And I think particularly Locatelli, I think could make a massive, massive difference to this side. So I'm actually reasonably chuffed with our work that we've done here.
Yeah, me too, actually. And I think that you can. There is some deadwood to be sold. I mean, at this point, I know you just said maybe they can get more out of him, but I probably would look to sell him TT. I would look to sell definitely Firpo if you're not going to play him. And then, you're kind of actually on a way to breaking even on these signings, which would be a pretty good position for Barcelona. So there you go, Dukes. We fixed Barcelona, but we haven't fixed them so they'd actually be good. We fixed them so they'll be within touching distance of the top.
Yeah, they'll be competent in La Liga.
Yeah, with a view to being good again one day, which, to be honest, Barcelona for a long time, the perfect has been the enemy of the good, and they really need to stop thinking about Barcelona DNA, because otherwise their DNA is going to be, it's going to be like it's going to be like dinosaur DNA. It's going to be something that's interesting but is a relic of the past. So So, Dukes, I think that brings us to the end of our show for today. Is there anything you'd like to point to before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I mean, if you've enjoyed our breakdown of some of Barcelona's finances, we mentioned, obviously go check out Continental Club on Eurofootball Daily, which dropped last Friday, where we also looked at Real Madrid's, which aren't great either, and all the top clubs in Europe. It's not just Barcelona facing financial difficulty. This wasn't our opportunity to sort of poke fun at Barcelona. It's just, with their finances, their sort of on-pitch style changing, the presidential elections are obviously one of the big topics in European football and the world football right now. So it was only right that we did another How to Fix, but I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, it's been nice to get back to one of these. It's been a while. Please, everybody, let us know which teams you would like to see us fix in future, because we would like to spend some more time on the podcast and make the content a little bit more varied for you. So make sure that you hit us up with your suggestions in the comments. Make sure that you subscribe to this as an audio podcast and as a video podcast on Football Daily Podcast on YouTube. Thank you very, very much for watching. Thank you, Dougie, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.